Did you know that some of the very best weapons in Warframe actually don't deal any damage? That's right. It might be easy to pick your equipment purely based on number big, but more often than not, it's actually the buffs and utility support that allow you to deal the massive damage in the first place. So, in this Warframe guide, I'm gonna show you the best buff and support weapons that everybody should have on their radar. Big shout out to all our generous channel members, and now, let's jump right into it. Starting out, I want to do with a weapon that I made a video on when it released last year. In this video, I called it the best secondary in the game, and while that might have been a little bit overly optimistic, the point still stands. The Sciatid is a ridiculously good sidearm, and everybody should have it sooner or later. Here's why. See, one big problem that a lot of loadouts run into is that you would like to have grouping capabilities, but you don't want to waste your helmet ability for it, and Nautilus as a companion might be a bit too inconsistent. In that scenario, the Sciatid is exactly what you need. These throwing knives have a great secondary fire. This one, upon impact, creates tendrils that pull in enemies in a 15-meter radius. By default, one projectile can latch on to 8 enemies maximum, however, this does scale with multi-shot. So, if you give the Sciatid a bunch of multi-shot, then you're easily going to be able to pull in everybody on screen. As for the build, that's actually pretty darn simple. I have a full build here, but you actually don't even need that. All you should focus on is giving it as much multi-shot as you can to be able to attract more enemies. So we're talking about barrel diffusion and lethal torrent. I wouldn't necessarily want to go for galvanized mods because you might not get the multi-shot stacks. These two are just fine. The rest here is mainly utility, more reload speed, more magazine capacity, and I also use secondary Merciless because that one gives you a passive 30% additional reload speed. All this is not mandatory though, these two mods alone will already do the trick for the grouping. In spot number 2, we have another one of the very best support guns in the game, and gun might be a little bit of a stretch here because what I'm talking about is actually a book. Of course, I mean the Grimoire. So let's quickly recap what makes this thing so good. Being a tome-type weapon, it can equip 2 special types of mods, those being the Invocation and the Canticle mods. You can pick one out of each category, and even though we don't have enough time in this video to talk in detail about absolutely everything here, from the buffs alone, you can see that these are very darn strong. Favorite example here would be up to plus 60% more ability strength depending on how many enemies you hit with your alt fire. As you can see here, the alt fire has quite a decent AoE, so getting it to the max shouldn't be all that difficult. But here's the great thing about that. Sure, on the mod it says the ability strength increase only lasts for 20 seconds. However though, a lot of abilities in this game can snapshot buffs. This means that when you activate the ability, then its numbers are based on your ability strength, range, and duration that you had the moment you cast the ability. And even if that changes later on when buffs run out or something, then many abilities will still retain the values that they had when they were activated. Most skills that work like this are those that have a fixed duration in seconds, however there are a bunch of exceptions too. Long story short though, having a secondary weapon where you just need to shoot an energy ball out and all of a sudden you have 60% more ability strength, that is very cool. And just as a little side note here, recently we got a new mod for the Velox, which kinda sorta does the same thing. Would have been very cool if the Velox was not a secondary weapon as well, because then you might have been able to stack 2 of those 60% strength buffs, but hey, I thought I'd just mention it on the side. Let's also here take a quick look at the build. And similar to the Sciatid previously, you don't actually have to do a full build like this in order to be able to use this weapon properly. What I did here is, of course, I went for Vohm Invocation, which is for the strength buff. Of course, you can use any invocation mod you want. I also chose a Canticle mod, but that's optional here too. What is good though is Prime Fulmination, or the normal variant, to increase the radius of your alt fire, so you hit more enemies, and the rest is mainly fire rate and multi-shot, so I can charge up this alt fire a bit faster. However, there is one thing that a lot of people really like to clown me for, and that is that I use ammo mutation on the Grimoire, a weapon that has infinite ammo. However, whenever you pick up pistol ammo with the Grimoire, that also recharges your alt fire. So if you have pistol ammo mutation, you gain more ammo pickups, you charge the alt fire faster. It's nothing crazy, but it does genuinely help. Up next, we have the first melee weapon on today's list, and that would be the Dex Nakana. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you know about it because I've talked a lot about it, and I recently made a video that got a lot of views talking specifically about this sword. So here's the short version. The Dex Nakana has a unique trait where instead of increasing your combo multiplier in increments of 20 hits, it only needs 11 hits of combo in order to amplify your multiplier. As a counterpoint here, it can unfortunately also only go up to 11 times multiplier, not 12 like most others, but the fact that it increases multiplier in increments of 11 is actually super darn strong. The reason for that is that we have a bunch of mods that give us initial combo. And while for most other melees, having something like Galvanized Steel will usually lock you in at like a 5 times initial combo multiplier, on the Dex Nakana, this amount of initial combo actually goes a lot further, leading to higher multipliers. This not only makes it pretty darn strong as a heavy attack weapon, but it also turns it into a very valuable stat stick for specific interactions that need a high combo multiplier. One example here would be Secondary Outburst, one of the strongest and most ridiculous arcanes for pistols, which takes your melee combo multiplier and turns it into a big crit chance and crit damage buff. Very nice to use on somebody like, for example, Mesa. All you need for this stat stick playstyle are these mods that give you initial combo. However, if you want to go a bit more into detail on the Dex Nakana, then check out my Dex Nakana video. And as always, if you could leave a quick like for the video, that would make me very happy because that helps the channel with the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for your support. And speaking of combo and combo multiplier and stuff, if you want to charge that up really quickly, then maybe you can make use of the next weapon, and that would be the Rauta. This one is the signature shotgun of Kullervo, and it has a very unique trait that for every hit it scores, it will increase your combo counter. So yeah, if you give it a bunch of fire rate and multi-shot, then one magazine can easily max your combo multiplier out at 12x. To keep it very short, this right here is a sort of experimental build that I'm working with. It's nothing special, just more multi-shot and a bunch of fire rate magazine capacity, convenience stuff. Wow, that was a short one. But guess what? We're still not done with the melees and with the Nakanas. Let's next talk about the Daikyu, or if you like, also the Prime variant. See, the fun thing with the Daikyu is that actually it's a pretty darn decent bow. However, the only thing that I ever use it for is to put one mod and one mod only on it, and that would be Amalgam Daikyu Target Acquired. Just to drive that point really home, this right here is my Daikyu build. It's even called the Yes Just One. That is literally the whole build here. Amalgam Daikyu Target Acquired has a substat that gives 3% lifesteal to Nakana type weapons. In other words, what that means is, whenever you play with any type of Nakana melee, then you should absolutely have the Daikyu as your primary weapon equipped. With it in your pocket, each and every hit that you deal with your Nakana will take 3% of the damage output and turn it into health for you. This makes you effectively invincible. You're gonna heal such crazy numbers even at highest levels. It's too good to be true. And now that we're already talking about bows, how about we go from one bow right over to the next? And that would be the Evensong. To be 100% fair, what I'm about to tell you is relatively niche. However, if you happen to play a loadout like this, it will be an absolute game changer. See, the Evensong has a unique trait that gives you a universal multi-shot buff. All in all, the number doesn't look all that impressive, right? However, the crazy part is that this multi-shot buff applies to all of your weapons, including melees. If you're now thinking, well, multi-shot on a blade doesn't make sense, does it? Then let me direct your attention to the Gunblade weapon class. These things are melees, but they do shoot, and they do have multi-shot. But being melees, they don't have access to any multi-shot mods. With the Evensong, however, they now all of a sudden do have that. And believe me, it can lead to some funky performance. By the way, shout out to WarframeFlo and his video on gunblades, where he brought that up in the first place. That's actually where I got that idea from. However though, let's talk about the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to support weapons, and that would be status primers. Of course, in Warframe there are a bunch of options for status priming. Everybody has their favorites, but in this video in specific, I want to mention 3 different weapons. The first one of which would be the Epitaph or the Epitaph Prime. This wrist-mounted grenade launcher is one of my absolute favorites. It has a high status chance, plus a pretty beefy blast radius, and is therefore perfectly made for applying status effects to a bunch of enemies in a larger AoE. Being a secondary weapon, it does have access to one of my favorite arcanes, that being Secondary Encumber. With this one, whenever you inflict a status effect naturally, you have a 24% chance to trigger a second, random status effect. What that means is, with the ridiculously high status chance that we have here, plus the multi-shot that we're rocking, we inflict a lot of natural status effects already. And then with Secondary Encumber, we get even more. The build right here is focused on Viral and Heat because these are 2 elements that I really wanted to have on the weapon and not have to rely on Secondary Encumber to get. And the rest is, multi-shot and status chance, stuff that makes the whole thing more convenient to use. By the way, Prime Fulmination, absolute goated mod, giving us a blast range of 14.4 meters. That is insane. The second weapon that I want to talk about in the primer category would be the Compressor or the Compressor Prime. This is Yareli's bubble gun, and while it might look pretty whack to shoot water droplets at your enemies, this thing is the very best single target primer in Warframe. See, whenever you're not fighting big hordes of enemies, but strong elite units or bosses, then the Compressor Prime is your best friend. This thing shoots so many bubbles with such a high status chance, no other secondary comes even close. Also here, this would be the build that I use for priming, mainly focused on multi-shot as well as status chance, and you will see that there are not that many elements here. Reason for that being is that we have Secondary Encumber, and this one will give us a bunch of status effects. So many in fact, that we don't even need to mod for specific elements here, because we're gonna get enough out of this one anyway. And the last weapon in the primer category that I want to talk about would be the Cedo. This shotgun is not only very good when it comes to dealing damage, but it has a great alt-fire. With this, it shoots a disc that bounces between enemies and causes explosions. These disc hits then will not only inflict the elements that are modded on the weapon, they will also put the 4 base elements, cold, heat, toxin, and electricity on the enemy. With a build like this here, this means you get a bunch of status priming. We already have electricity, blast, radiation, magnetic, and viral modded on the Cedo, plus we would then also get toxin, cold, and heat as additional base elements from the unique trait and the disc that we're shooting out. It's not necessarily the best status primer in the game, but I think the best status primer in the primary weapon slot, if for whatever reason you can't use a pistol for that. Let's next though talk about a weapon category that is very underrated and underused, and that would be the spear guns, primarily the Aphentis. Now, I don't want to talk all too much about how the weapon itself works, because the interesting part for this video would be what this thing does when you throw it. Wherever it lands after a throw, it creates an AoE on the ground. You and allies standing in that AoE then will gain a bunch of very nice buffs, those being plus 50% reload speed, plus 20% fire rate and attack speed, plus 100% reserve ammo, minus 50% recoil. The Aphentis is not the only spear gun though that gives you nice effects, however, it's my personal favorite among them, and for the sake of this video, we unfortunately don't have the time to do a deep dive on spear guns in general. Up next, we have another melee, and that would be the Furax, the MK1 Furax, or the Furax Wraith. That's right, the entire Furax family goes, and it really doesn't make any difference. Similarly to the Daikyu, also here, the reason why we want those in the first place is because of one specific Amalgam mod. The name of it is Amalgam Furax Body Count, and also it turns the Furax family into a very nice stat stick. What it does is very simple. It gives plus 45% fire rate to secondary weapons. So whenever you want to play a pistol build and have a little bit more oomph, then it's always a good idea to have the Furax in your pocket just for that passive fire rate bonus. This, by the way, also works for exalted weapons, with one unfortunate exception in the form of Titania. Due to the fact that Titania in her Razorwing mode has both a secondary and a melee weapon equipped, the exalted melee will overwrite the Furax as equipped melee weapon in the game code whenever Titania is in her exalted mode. That's the only exception that I know of, though. Okay, up next we have one of my absolute favorite melee weapons of all time. I still think though that it's underutilized and a lot of players are probably still sleeping on it, so let me tell you about the Rakta Dark Dagger. First of all, just in case I'm gonna spark your curiosity with this one, I already have a dedicated video on it, which even though it's pretty old already, is still perfectly up to date, so you can check it out later if you want. However though, the main kicker with the Rakta Dark Dagger is its unique trait. A portion of the damage that you deal to enemies which are afflicted with radiation is going to be converted into shields for you. At first, this sounds pretty situational. I mean, the enemies need to be irradiated, until you find out that the Rakta Dark Dagger has radiation as one of its damage types right out the factory. You then just need to put a bit of electricity on it, slap melee influence on, and congratulations, you're now dealing damage to while irradiating the entire room around you, and your shield will barely ever go down. The only little downside here is that in case, for whatever reason, your shield ever fully depletes, then this shield recharge from the Rakta Dark Dagger actually doesn't work. It only works while there is still shield left, so it's not like Arcane Aegis. Still though, for any type of shield tanking setup, having the Rakta Dark Dagger in your pocket and doing the occasional melee hit will make it so that you'll never have to think about survivability. This right here would be one example build that I personally like to use with Saren, however it should work just fine with other setups as well. We're going for electricity in order to be able to trigger melee influence, and as element of our choice, we also add gas onto the weapon. Reason being that, the gas clouds deal damage over time to enemies in the area, and as we just said, that gas damage over time will also contribute to our shield recharge. However though, before we go on to the next weapon, there is one more even crazier interaction that I want to show here. If you combine it with the Argonac, then you have pure neuron activation. The Argonac in and of itself is not a great weapon, however, it has one of these very funky amalgam mods. I'm talking about Amalgam Argonac Metal Auger. This one makes it that damage from daggers reduces enemy armor by 6. Now, to explain it very simply, what this armor reduction by 6 means is, it reduces 6 points off of the base armor value of the enemy, so it's actually pretty darn good. The kicker here though is, the armor reduction happens whenever the dagger inflicts a damage tick, no matter how. So if we're using, melee influence with gas clouds in the entire room, then every damage tick from every DOT on every melee influenced enemy will have that 6 armor reduction. As you can also see in the background, this is incredibly freaking busted. I love it, and it keeps you alive by charging your shield at the same time. And last but definitely not least, I want to talk about the Hirudo, or also its Coda variant. These fist-type melee weapons aren't only nice to play with, but they also have a very powerful unique trait. Whenever you hit a crit with them, this hit will have 5% lifesteal. Depending on the damage number, that can be quite a bit. In addition, it will grant the Invigorated buff, which increases maximum health by 5% for 15 seconds, and it can stack up to 5 times. In other words, you not only get lifesteal, but also probably 25% more maximum health for pretty much all the time. So, whenever health is an issue, you might want to give the Hirudo or the Coda Hirudo a try. And if you want to destroy any boss-type enemy in mere seconds, then check out my top 10 boss killer weapons right here. Another massive shoutout to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Underkani02, Scalabauza, Mihawki, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Morizaki, Shadow Lockhart, Hantares, Peter Zader, Boomia1, Mr. Games, Zave Awendai, Zengen, Quax, Henrik5984, Blue Eagle 98, Hearthwield, Everin8802, Gabriel Tevez, Jaco Ivan Gonzalez, Candy Fox 19, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, good loot!